Hey, I'm Rachel with Restorations by Rachel. Welcome to my channel. This week I am working on this beautiful Art Deco bar cabinet. It's extra fun because I'm doing a bar cabinet alongside several other YouTube friends. So if you found me that way, welcome. If you are not new to my channel, I would love for you to go check out those videos. I will link them. This will all be part of a playlist. So it's gonna be really fun just to see everybody's like different pieces they pick and the interpretations and decisions they make. So for my piece, on my last project that I stripped and sanded my life away on the table and chairs. And so this one, I am hoping to just do a process where you sand it down lightly so you can then apply a gel stain. And that helps with like a gel stain. It sits on top of the surface. So my plan is for it to tone down this orange that's already there and then hopefully just clean up this hardware. I'm hoping it's going to look really nice. There is some damage. I'm going to have to fill and color match, but I'm hoping as a whole it will be a pretty low-key, easier update to this cabinet. So let's get going and see how it goes.
First things first is removing the hardware. I found a fun little surprise when I was taking it off. The back of the hardware says made in England, which I've never come across that before.
I've looked around for a maker's mark and it looks like there used to be one, but unfortunately it is gone. But that hardware saying is made in England. I'm going to have to try to do some more research too. There we go, to see if I can find if this actually was from England.
Whenever I remove the hardware, I always like to put a long screw through the hardware hole and then secure it with a piece of tape so I can then still open and close the drawer as I need to. Now, this drawer on the right, as you probably saw in the beginning, it does not stay shut on its own. It's missing the hardware to do that. The previous owners put some kind of two-sided sticky tape on there, so I am removing that, and then I'm getting to cleaning because this thing is dirty. When cleaning a piece, you always want to pull out your drawers because those are often hiding lots of dirt. This had cobwebs, dust, and you can even see as I'm vacuuming the back that it's on the back of the drawer, which is pretty dirty. So I'm giving that a good vacuum and then wipe down, and you can see on my towel how dirty it was. The track for the sliding glass was also holding a lot of dirt and dust. I took probably a good 15 minutes just trying to clean this area. I sprayed it down first, wiped it with the paper towel, and then I came in with a wire brush, and then I followed that up with a dental pick tool and was picking it out of there because it was just so stuck in there and really gross. This method for doing an easy refinish with just a scuff sand and gel stain, I actually learned from Lisa at Ivy Lane Home. It's General Finishes protocol. I am not using the cleaner that they suggested because I did not have it on hand and I was having a hard time finding it nearby, but it would have just been a 50-50 mixture of denatured alcohol and water. I'm just using some diluted ammonia. From what I read, it has pretty similar capabilities, and since it's just for cleaning, I wasn't too worried about it being different. I used 1 part ammonia to 4 parts water, so it was about 20% ammonia, and I think I probably could have diluted it a bit more. The areas around the hardware had a lot of dirt and grime built up from over the years, so I made sure to scrub those areas where I couldn't see any of the dark markings anymore. It was also quite effective at cleaning up the inside of the drawers because those are very dirty as well. And don't forget to flip those pieces upside down. You will always find some kind of spider webs, spider eggs, just dirt, whatnot under there. So I gave that a good vacuum. Now that it's all clean, it is time to prep the piece for the gel stain. So the process is to give it a good scuff sand without peeling back any of the finish. I do have some places where the finish came back a little bit, but it wasn't bad, and I figured the gel stain would cover it well since it's just sitting on top of there. I'm using 180 grit here, and I also decided to mostly hand sand just because I would have more control over how much is being sanded off. If you get out an electric sander, that's just going to be a lot more aggressive than what you can sand by hand generally. Spoiler alert, I did not like how it ended up. It still just had too much orange undertones to it. It went on a little streaky, and so I just decided to scrap it and strip it. So back to acetone it was. I've come to like acetone for stripping finish like this. I would not recommend it for painted surface or anything like that, but for something like this, especially an old stain, it works really well. You're just pouring it on the surface if it's flat like this, or I'll use a scrub brush or paper towel to wipe it on if it's a vertical surface. And you just scrub in a small section and wipe back before it dries. You are working for a bit, but like it only took me 40 minutes to do this entire top, and that's not too bad in my opinion. Now, after I have finished stripping an area, I will go back with like a paper towel and acetone, pour the acetone onto the paper towel and wipe back areas that I see some bigger spots of stain still left. I have several little areas where the veneer is missing. I have not gotten into actually like having veneer sheets that I cut to fit, but I'm just going to use this quick wood, and it's a little epoxy wood repair kit. It's rather easy to work with. Since I have several areas that I'm going to fill, I'm going to make sure I cut off plenty of that, but you make sure when you are doing it, you don't break it off, because it has pretty precise, and obviously I'm being careful, cutting towards myself, has pretty precise ratios. So you just take that, and I'm going to start mixing it to get the color nice and uniform. And it has, I think, 15 minutes of work time. And then once it's in there and set, it can be painted, sanded, drilled in an hour. So pretty great. It's very durable. And I'm going to use it to fill in all these areas. You know what? I just remembered I wanted to mix in some of my stain that I'm going to use to help color this more like what I want. So I'll do that so it's a little bit darker and I won't have to color match as much once it's dry. So you just take a little piece and place it into the area that's missing veneer. I like to have it a little bit above the surface so I can just sand it flat and then have it overlap along the edge as well. Color wise, it did turn out like a little bit more gray or darker than I was anticipating, so I don't know if I'll mix stain in again, but it was nice to have it a little bit darker to start with to help when I was doing color matching. Another con is that I felt like it made the epoxy take longer to dry. Another issue I had is that due to the age, it just had a funky odor to it. So I took a water and vinegar solution and wiped down every area that I wasn't going to refinish. And then once that was dry, I went in with spray shellac. It does a really good job generally of masking any of those musty odors. Always just make sure that you are wearing a respirator because this stuff is pretty stinky and toxic to breathe. Before I strip this door front, I'm going to go ahead and sand down the epoxy I put on here yesterday. I do feel like adding that stain caused the dry time to be much longer, so that's one of the reasons I left it overnight. But I'm taking a 220 grit. I'm going to sand this down. If it doesn't work very well, I'll switch to 180. I'm going slowly so I don't sand it down too much, since you hear my son in the background, so I don't accidentally burn through the veneer. Alright, I feel like that's pretty good. It sanded down really well. So I'll do these other ones too.
Okay, y'all, time for a little story time. I know I'm going to sound muffled because I'm in my respirator. But when I was picking this up, it was upstairs on a second floor. And like looking at it, I thought it would be decently heavy. It was owned by an older couple. A lady was selling it for her mom because her mom didn't have Facebook. They're downsizing. You know, they're probably upper 60s, I'd say. Well, the lady's boyfriend was going to help me carry it down. It had this kind of like, you know, slightly curved winding staircase. Well, the older husband wanted to bring it down, like didn't want me to carry it, which is very kind and considerate, but he like had a bum knee. And so he like refused. I was like, I got it. Like we could take the drawers out and I'll make it lighter. But I can't remember if we took the drawers out honestly, but the boyfriend was down on the bottom, kind of taking more of the weight, and then the dad was, you know, at the top part of it as they went down. But I was like praying and worried the entire time, and he literally they got to the bottom and he was immediately like, all right, we need to set it down, I was so grateful he didn't get hurt. But what was kind of interesting, like then when the boyfriend and I loaded it in my car and I went to pick it up, it is not heavy, y'all. So I can't imagine if he had tried to carry this down and it were heavy. So I don't know, I guess it's just a good lesson for when I get older to not be stubborn. But anyways, that was scary. I'm glad it ended up okay. I'm curious, y'all who do furniture work, have you ever, like, I'd love to know what your craziest pickup story is. I feel like that's the one that's kind of my, I don't know, most alarming one. I have to think about, I can't think of any other interesting ones right now.
The next day, after I was finished stripping and it had plenty of time to dry, it was time to sand. One of the things I love about my orbital sander is that the speed is adjustable. So if I want to start out a little slower just to see how the veneer takes to sanding, then I can do that. Not all sanders are adjustable with their speed, so that's something I would look for if I were you when shopping for one. And if you're interested in looking at any of the tools or products that I use, I always link that in the description if you want to check that out. I'm using 120 grit to start with. I always prefer to start out with my orbital sander as well. I'll use that for any flat surfaces, and then if I have any curved areas, I'll use a foam interface pad on my orbital. You do want to be careful though, because since the orbital is so much more powerful, it can still burn through veneer, which happened to me in one spot on this project. But for these tight corners that's on the edge, I'll use my Surf Prep sander, and then I'll use my Surf Prep sander as well to get into any corners that I can't with my orbital. Then any of the areas that I can't get to with those two sanders, I will use this contour sanding kit to get any nooks and crannies or anything like that. You always want to make sure that you're sanding in the same direction of the grain, especially in these little areas. It can be really tempting to just sand across the grain, but it'll leave these scratch marks that will look not so great when you stain.
So you can see even after sanding with 120 that it is still pretty splotchy. Like, a lot of the finish came up, but then, you know, kind of at the same time, there's still quite a bit there. So I'm actually going to hand sand with this little guy with the 120 grit and see if that'll help. Okay, here she is all sanded down through the 120. You can see the camera is kind of picking up, like, still seems kind of splotchy with what I was able to sand back. But I'm hoping if that's still there after I go through the grits that the gel stain will help cover that up. You know, one thing that is super interesting, because like I know oak's like a tight grain, you know, I sanded with 120, but this is like not rough at all. These trim pieces of wood that are different type, those do feel more like I would expect them to feel after 120, but I don't know if it's because it's the quarter sawn like oak with the veneer, or if it's just because it's oak, but I don't remember, like on that East Lake dresser that I last did, I don't remember it feeling like this after 120, so kind of interesting. If anybody has thoughts on that, would love to know.
Between grits, I will wipe back any sanding dust from the previous sanding grits. That's just going to help you sand better, and then if you have any sanding dust lying on the surface, that could cause extra scratches into the wood, and it's best to avoid that. I'm basically going to go through my same process as before. The first grit that you do always takes the longest, because that's when you're trying to get off any last bit of finish that there is, and then any subsequent grits, you're just trying to smooth out the surface. Now, since this quarter sawn oak veneer was like already so smooth at 120, I just sanded through 180 with it. And then the other areas, I did an additional pass with 220 grit. After I felt like it was ready to be stained, I gave it a good vacuum and wipe down for the sanding dust. And then I'm coming in with mineral spirits to wipe back any remaining sanding dust. You can see it's still picking up some even after vacuuming and wiping it down. If you're going to be using an oil-based stain, mineral spirits is a really great product to give your surface a good final cleaning. Next up is a pre-stain. I'm using an oil-based pre-stain since I'm going to be using an oil-based stain. You can find water-based pre-stains as well. What you want to use is just a lint-free cloth, or you could use a chip brush, but you want to wipe it on there in some form, and then 5 to 15 minutes later, you will wipe back any excess. This just gives a good base layer to your wood so that the stain will absorb more evenly. For me, it's actually a step that I sometimes forget to take, but it's really quick and easy and is really helpful. Now it's time for stain. I'm using the color Coffee in Minwax Gel Stain. What you want is just, again, lint-free cloths. I'm using the same cloth the whole time. I'm dipping it into the gel stain, wiping it on the surface in the direction of the wood grain, and then within 3 minutes, you want to wipe it back. I'm having pretty optimal weather. It's been in the 60s around when I was applying this. And I would say it's honestly about max 3 minutes. You just want to keep an eye on it. You'll notice that it starts to look a little different. It's not quite as shiny. And then if you're wiping it, it'll get just like stickier. It's nice when you can just kind of smoothly wipe it back. It's like your rag glides over it. That's when you know it's not getting too sticky. But if it's getting sticky, you could put some more stain on there and then quickly wipe it back, or just rub a bit harder as you're wiping back to make sure you don't have any streakiness. Once it's time to wipe back, you want to make sure you have plenty of cloths on hand. I just have this big box of them that I can pull out of that as I need. And just wiping back in the direction of the grain, I like to start where I first applied since that's going to be the driest. And then I'll wipe until I don't see any excess stain and move along. And then before moving on to another section, I will take the rag and wipe it over the entire surface lightly just to make sure I get any excess stain I may have missed. And always make sure that you lay your rags out to dry before throwing them away, because they could spontaneously combust if not. Now I'm going to speed this up quite a bit, but this reel time took 11 minutes start to finish to do the top section, but I thought it might help to see, if you're working with a larger section, exactly how I went about it. I started at one side and just went to the other, just like I did with the drawer, but with having such a large surface, it can be a little tricky. You can maybe miss the spots where it starts to dry on you, and you'll see later that I have to fix a couple spots where I didn't wipe it back as well. But this is something you just get better at with experience. I'm still working and getting better at it too, but just wanted to show you what it was like. Alright, I do not like this on both corners actually, where the stain absorbed this way. It's like I didn't wipe it back well enough, so I'm about to wipe down some of the other areas with mineral spirit. So I'm going to see if I can just kind of wipe back a little bit of this, if it'll work or not. Just getting some of it off. For the detailed carved areas, I had to get creative and put my cloth over a flathead screwdriver to get into those tight spaces to spread out the stain, and then also to pick it back up. But hey, it worked. It is time to tackle these areas that I filled. You can see they took the stain actually okay. So hopefully it won't be too much to fill it in, but there are several spots, so I'm going to get to work on that. So I have, what is that, 2, 4, I have 6 of these blend all sticks. You can buy a kit, and I can link the kit. I don't think it's these exact colors, but I bought this from like a Mohawk retailer, and like where you could just pick which ones you wanted individually, but the kit will be very similar. So I have ginger brown, harvest brown, dark walnut, burnt umber, perfect brown, and true brown. So it's a good variety of browns. But since this is darker, I'm actually gonna start to see what this ginger kind of looks if I add it. But it's way too light. Way too light. Let's see what the burnt umber is like. And you're kind of just rub it with your finger. I mean, that's looking pretty good, honestly. Yeah, I might spray that guy. So, and then I have this easy vinyl sealer. That's gonna help seal in the wax that I'm putting on there. And that's why I'm wearing my respirator. And then when I top coat over it, it will, gotta aim right. It will go over that well, but it'll help seal that in, so the top coat won't make it kind of run. And it dries rather quickly. So let's see what it looks like in here. And this is not something I've done a whole lot of, you know, just try to continue to work at getting better. And playing with it. So just gonna be playing with all these little spots. And then I'll just kind of skip around like, while that's drying, I'll just come over here to work. After all that's finished, it is time to top coat. Before I do that, I want to make sure I get off any dust, so I'm using a tack cloth to wipe that back. I'm using Minwax wipe-on poly. As you can see, my Minwax game is strong on this makeover. Not sponsored, but they just happen to be using all their products, but they're great. So it's pretty easy to use. You just shake up the can and you can pour it onto a flat surface like this and start wiping it on. I'm using a lint-free cloth. You could use like a rag or a brush. This is just what I have and what's easy. You don't want to overwork this too much, and I just work in sections, move left to right, right to left, whatever you think. It's going to put on a thin coat each time, so I'm going to do 3 rounds with this. And if I have any bubbles that pop up, then I'll kind of just gently wipe back over it if I'm still working in that area. This is actually only my second time to use wipe-on poly, so I feel like it's a pretty quick learning curve and it's not too hard to work with. I'd say the trickier one is vertical surfaces. I'll pour it on my rag and then try to quickly put it onto the surface before it spills off my rag. But you can see just from how it looks wet in the areas that I've applied it, it's easy to work with and just know areas that you've put it on and where you've missed. Between my second and third rounds of top coat, I decided to go ahead and work on the wallpaper for the cabinets. Okay, getting this wallpaper in here might be interesting. I've marked my center points because I want this guy to start like right here. There's my center point here. It is a little bit offset, like it's not going to be completely centered if I do this, like according to this side, but it will be to here. So I don't know, we'll just see how it looks once it's on there. If I think it looks too wonky, then you know I will adjust. But yeah, I've also cut it down to where it's mostly to size for the interior as well. And I started with only peeling it back to just below that point, so it won't be wanting to stick as I put it in here, but I'll wish me luck. As you can see me struggling here, this did not work out. I tried it multiple times thinking like, oh, maybe I do this way or change this. It was just wrinkling the paper, and there was no way I was going to be able to do it the way I had originally planned on the back and the bottom. So after several failed attempts, I decided to just call it and put it on the bottom. But if you like watching train wrecks, then I'll let you watch my multiple attempts and then me just working through like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do here?
really don't like dealing with this, y'all. Oh, it's terrible, guys. I'm gonna have to regroup.
After finally deciding to pivot just for the bottom, I am using what is typically used for sewing, this mat, to measure out and cut, go ahead and pre-cut that straight line where I'm wanting to start the pattern. It has that nice, I don't know, it kind of looks like a seashell lines, like how it spreads out from the middle to me. But I just used a straight edge and then my craft knife for cutting along there, and I measured the inside of the drawers too, and then cut them mostly to size. I had about an extra 1/4 inch on each side just to give me a little bit of wiggle room, but that's how I cut them out before installing them, and this went so much easier. I like to line it up first with the front edge closest to me and then smooth it out as I go. I will leave a little bit of the paper on in the back just for extra safety. Sometimes it'll want to stick or fold and stick to itself. So I'll wait to peel that back until I've gotten the front where I want it. This Bondo spreader is good for smoothing out the wallpaper. I'll also use an old gift card or even a hotel room key if you happen to take one of those home. And then it's just a matter of cutting off the excess. I have this little craft knife I like to use. You can also use an X-Acto knife, but I just go along the edge. I try to be very careful while I'm doing this because if you happen to cut off too much, then it can look wonky and then you have to cut another piece and you might have only bought enough rolls to not have any mess ups. So it's just all those things. I just try to take a little bit extra time, make sure I do it right so I don't have to do it again. While I was in there, I decided to go ahead and apply Howard's Feed and Wax to the sides of the cabinet. It is so good at just refreshing wood, making scratches go away. I'm also going to put it along the drawer glides because that will help the drawers open and close more smoothly. Okay, I have these areas that I blended in. They look okay, not perfect, but I think one thing that will help is to draw some of these like darker grain lines in there. So I'm going to use this little kit to paint it in. I've used it once prior. I'm going to see how black looks. Hopefully it doesn't look too black. I think I'll just kind of wipe it back. I'm hoping it'll they sell Mohawk has these pens that I think I might have to just invest in. They're expensive. I didn't want to pay for as much as they were, but after this little experiment, I might just have to break down and pay the money. Now, I didn't record it for some reason, but I just used that same spray that I used over the blending sticks to put over this paint. So when I put my other round of top coat on, that it wouldn't bleed or anything like that. Now, before I do the last round of top coat, I am sanding the entire surface with 400 grit. I'm going to get this nice and smooth. Just a reminder, wear your respirator. You might not think that much dust is going up in the air, but it certainly is, and you don't want to breathe that in. I will then go over it with a vacuum and finally a tack cloth before applying that final coat. While that's drying, I headed inside to clean the hardware. I usually will first simmer it in a pot of about like 25% vinegar, 75% water, but I didn't this time and I didn't want to wait on it to do that, so I just went straight to cleaning it with water and barkeeper's friend, and it worked well. I was planning on not making it like 100% clean. It still has a little bit of that aged patina in it, and I think it turned out really nice.
So I'm lining the inside of these drawers. An issue I ran into is that if I do it the exact same way, goodness, that I did in the cabinets, then I have like this little sliver of an edge on each side. And I like you could, put that in there, but I'm just afraid with lining up the curve of the drawer and then the straight edge of the side of the bigger piece that it's just going to be like not look that great. So I got my husband's opinion on this too. I think I'm going to do it sideways, which I know is still not ideal, but I think if I maybe do this here in the middle, you mentioned like there'd be at least different enough, same but different, that would look okay. Because at first I thought about maybe lining it up to the edge there, and then the kind of, I don't know, it reminds me of seashell. That arched area would go out from there, but I think I'm going to center it and then we'll just see how it goes. But I don't know. Let me know, what would you have done? So I'm going to get this in here, hopefully looking good. But the way, this is my first time to do curve fronts for drawer liners, but the way that I've seen it done, let me mark where my center is. And I'm going to line the drawer liner hole. My son's around here with a bully and he's shaking in my face. Line this up, and what's nice, so I have this line that I made here, lining it up with the drawer hole. What's nice is I also have these lines here that I can kind of check to make sure that the drawer is lining up straight too. All right, I like that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this pin and trace right along there. Just go ahead and do this too. And then you cut right along there and it should fit in your drawer really well.
The last step was to fix that door that wouldn't close. I added just a little magnet latch. It was pretty easy to install. It did take me a couple of times to get it just right, but it worked. All right, that was a lot of work, but to appreciate where we are, let's look back at where we started. The stain was pretty orange. It was quite dirty. It had plenty of areas that needed to be repaired. But all in all, it was a really neat piece, and I'm really excited with how it turned out. How about you? I love the dark stain on this beautiful tiger oak veneer. I thought the wallpaper worked well as a nod to the Art Deco style. I love to think about the possible history of the piece, like how did it get to the States, who's owned it, what have they used it for. I just think all those things are interesting, like what has it seen in its life. I also wanted to show a close-up of the areas where I made repairs. It turned out pretty good overall. I think adding Those little fake veins helped make it blend in better. I really hope that you enjoyed this bar cabinet restoration, and I would love for you to tune in to the other ones if you haven't already. Remember, those will be linked in the description, the playlist, so you can go check out all those lovely ladies and their work. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will look forward to catching you on the next one.